During the pentagram rite, it was as if the tree disappeared and the room was different, and there was an oval sort of blue gateway. With the first set of vibrations, it was like there were low vibrations that could be felt up off the floor, but the source was from beneath. With the second set of vibrations, the pages glowed violet, different than the lighting or anything in the room. I felt a heavy pressing in. And then, with the third set, from the bowl to the light, was a blue mist. With the fourth set, there was a peculiar silence and a heavy pressing in feeling. With the fifth set, I saw a jagged purple within the glass. During the final reading, I felt weightless. There were some variations of sparklies in the room, and eventually I felt warm. I felt the pain relieved more subtly. In the final scrying, the analgesia became stronger scourings, and there was a soft neon blue outline of something right around here. Much the same sort of presences that I get in the cemetery, how I point out that these dimensions are, there was something there. Like today, I don't know if I mentioned it, but I didn't get anything distinctive, but I got a rather distinctive shape right here. I think that Robert Graves doesn't talk so much in terms of his writings are magic themselves, but in terms of ideas related to magic. And as far as the sigil, we do find that relationships are the sort of things that people construct those things for. And the past and the future can be very much connected all the time. A twined heart reminds us of connections, but connections that don't get fulfilled because of pride about one's sense of identity or about being in charge. Olive tree is the sort of thing that you use the presence of what's in the environment. Once more is how people try to continue things, and it does seem to solve things for a time. Victims of Calumny is about how life is generally just going to be heartache, or without any fooling of the other, there's going to be problems that bring things about, but you kind of forget the problems or set them aside and move on. Love gifts, particularly when we refer to love as a feeling, we are going to back it up materially. Or be provoked materially. Mankind and ocean. We look at things at different times. And when we love the details. Now, to refer to salt, it's like salt's needed to survive, so there's that aspect. Virgin Mirror connects the beauty of youth to innocence. And let us remember there's more than one type of innocence. And that's not the only one. And of course, in losing both of those things, no innocence may be lost. Secret theater. Now, is the music, when most of the night is over, is that physical music? Or is it like the Gandharvas or something, right? How it started reminds us that some things actually take time to get started. You don't want to think about when you first met someone. You want to think about, when you started to work together, or when you got into a deeper relationship of any sort. Brief reunion reminds us of the sort of things that people address about, something happens and it changes things forever. The Judges is how when we do something with someone else, the judgment of, the opinion of what's going on or what's discovered comes out differently. Like a lot of people, they collect rocks and shells and stuff, but they don't collect it without a context. So they can literally pick up their jar on their counter and tell a story. Particularly living in a small apartment or something like that, you find people doing that they don't, have much comparatively. Love and night. I like to stop on the whole Seventh-day Adventist idea. It's like maybe in that community, certain health factors they were known for, so the appearance being different. Child with veteran. Well, there's certain terms of endearment that don't quite mesh with me. One, because I've had to deal with some pretty bad people. And otherwise, in society, there's a risks to using such, right? So referring to people as a child, but, certainly young enough to be somebody's child is to some degree an issue, but it doesn't ever have to be. Even if the person's old enough to be the person's grandparent, again, if they're of the age of accountability, that sort of thing doesn't matter. But in a way, some people do give us some sort of experience points for being around them, and I don't mean experience points and, what a lot of people may focus on. Purification. The one thing that I draw attention to is that even in a dream, Because sometimes having a dream enables us to deal with our issues. Powers unconfessed reminds that you don't always have to point out about your powers or your deeds or whatever. It's, sure, if you're being wronged or something, you can say something, or if either what you're capable of or whatever, but it's not a big deal that, people don't know what you're capable of. Pandora. Most of us will have heard of the Pandora's box myth. And, well, children can be like that. We don't know what they're going to be. We don't know what is released into the world. Solomon's seal. Well, I do have that plant. But the idea is that such a thing bears witness to something even older. I saw a purple with blue in the middle blob right in the center there. But it's seen beyond the trees. To put it simply, it's how we shouldn't blame our constraint on external factors that have nothing to do with our own choices, or at least they don't have to. To tell and be told is about knowing ahead of time, about waiting. The theme of death takes us beyond fears of ends and how other endings are there to learn about for the current and future endings. At the well reminds us that there are tasks, and when those tasks are done, people return to the same. Logic can be used to point to more than just the apparent or present. Robber's Den reminds us that there is credit due, but you don't always have to express it. The Accomplice reminds us that there are things that take a part in what you do other than you. And perhaps you're stringing them along. Maybe they're stringing you along. First love kind of makes one think of when things find their beginning. There was someone that I thought they might have died, and that's when I realized. And I cannot say that it was before that. Other people try to trace things much earlier in a relationship. Through dark wood. Well, some of us just step slowly or attentively, maybe put a hand in front of our face just in case. But others don't, particularly together. And relationships can be kind of like that, right? In the vestry shows the flaw in the idea of marriage, particularly when people become secular. I say marriage is beyond procreation. And as much as in general a person should seek that out, that if you're young enough to reproduce, that you should probably find someone to reproduce with, if that's an option. But then again, should you turn down a good marriage because that's not an option? Oh, by the way, by marriage, I mean, the spiritual thing, not the civil union. When love is not, well, if we refer to it as less than the end, one of the things that we could look at with all that is that, maybe we realize there's more to life, more factors that we have to engage. The reiteration sounds like playing a record, right? And I guess when records were the thing, if you had a good one, you played it over and over again until you started having problems playing it. Man of Evil reminds us that it's not just directly what we do, it's the guilt and shame that we allow ourselves to carry with it. But let's be honest, when people are called towards and take part in the same thing, why should we presume that the one debauched or misled the other? They've both made the mistake, so whoever brought it up, they agreed on it. Whatever form, whatever that may be. The raft reminds us of how relationships can leave an individual detached. The uncut diamond, and if you've seen an uncut diamond, you may not realize that it's a diamond. And it also refers to the government's control over things. The government tries to prevent people from your standard lost and found or discovery elements. It used to be you could travel anywhere, and if it was resources that you lawfully acquired, hey, why not? You can go between countries, within countries, and not have to worry too much. If you had a religion, you paid your alms on it, and that was it. My ghost, well, I think I'm not sure when it was written, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to share it on the channel, but there's certainly an autobiography of Robert Graves. And the thing about texts like that is that it leaves a person like they're living with their own ghost. The risk makes me think that even before some of the modern drugs that people take for enhancement, that he was admitting the problems to one's own health for finding too incompatible of a partner in terms of difference of age and that sort of stuff. Well, either person's in something acrobatic. Something to say reminds us that no matter how popular we may be, or no matter what audience we may have, there's something to be kept for the self. And one should have that with their spiritual life. Their spiritual life should be such that not all the reading, not all the rituals, even people who have twice the content of me still should have something private they keep to themselves. Occasionalia, research and development classified, reminds us that others will do the classifying of us. The imminent 70s, well, the revolution coming on isn't as much true freedom as people would think it was. And I guess we're a ways right now from referring to the imminent 30s. But perhaps if I remember, I'll do a poem or something. Carol of Patience reminds us whether we can't find something or whatever the case, maybe something is, interesting and joyous. This, I guess, sort of comes off as a Christmas poem, just like the last one related more to what people call the Old Testament. H just refers to the language, letters, and relating it to humanity. Like some people say, well, the hue in humanity is divine, so therefore it's like, that's not really good etymology. And a lot of the etymology that people do, it's like, if it's a different language, it doesn't mean it comes from that. I was thinking some etymological thoughts walking down a street today. Invitation to Bristol. Oh, I was thinking of heaven and haven and the fire sacrifices of India. So, invitation to Bristol. Well, if we're encouraging people towards something, that would definitely be better off as an encouragement towards a person's actual, some relation to the person at hand. And if it's just an influencer, well, certainly the recommendation. The primrose bed. I kind of like primroses. Camille's too, even. And as much as they're standoffish to it, like unicorns guarding virgins and eunuchs being incapable, they are definitely symbols of sex, symbols of no sex or inability for sex, really. The strangling in Marion Square refers to patience, and it doesn't refer to a murder. The awakening refers to the afterlife, and it indicates something that we all should probably learn, is that God's due, the hududullah, as it's called, is not just prayers or rituals. When I saw the title, The Hoopoe Tells Us How, I thought it was going to be some Islamically influenced tale or something related as such, but it comes out more astrologically and basically something about spring and maybe covenants have to start over when they're unfulfilled. The wand is how hatred may form because of mutual worries. Now, it's a lot more reasonable when there's hatred of the deeds that are done between individuals. 5 comes out closer to a magical spell than anything else in tonight's reading. Quinique. My French is not so good. Or maybe it's not, maybe it's Latin. Yeah, that looks like Latin. Anyways, we can be crowned with the stars and have a sense of sacredness in very name. And when the names and words are known, say it. Northeast to southwest is more of a prayer direction access in my area. And no matter what the changes of what's going on, some things do not go away. Gorgon Max is like, there's secrets. People will say they don't know, but they know. And they let you know that they know. To be poets, well, if you're going to be an artist, there's limits involved. With a gift of rings, well, you want your gifts to be appreciated, right? Casa Noisette reminds us that there are some things to do to have control, to compete your way to standing apart, and there are things that aren't. The garden reminds us that despite contradictions, there are things that we can approach. The green-sailed vessel just gets me to thinking about how colors connect to each other. I try to understand my experiences, and therefore I don't relate when just, okay, the shiny, that's unusual, but then again, that color is right near it or something like that. So I don't say that. So the colors and stuff I relate, it's different than what is being seen physically. Although when you're scrying, it kind of seems like it's physical. But, I know it's not going to show up in the room if I had the camera on. Dreaming children, well, we see what can happen with trees and stuff, so it could have been us, right? I was out on the dirt road. It used to be a road that people drove through, but, and this road, with the gravel and all that stuff, there was a lightning strike when I was out there, and you could feel it. It's like, you never see something so bright in your life as, as far as the physical stuff going on, right? But you're spared, even though, you felt it go through the air. The prohibition, well, what we're restrained from doesn't mean that thing that we're told no to isn't full of vitality. Just because it's not engaging doesn't mean it's not full of vitality. Serpent's tail, well, without beginning, without end, right? And you can kind of think of things from those different angles. The old and the young are the same. Until we both, well, it helps to have gratitude sessions, but let them be real. Certainly when it comes to Thanksgiving, people are, a bit weird with some of that stuff. Well, definitely they can makes for a good TV show or something like this when it's like, oh, I remember this really bad Thanksgiving. I'm going to include it in the movie that I write. And like, I bet some relatives still remember when I acted like one of the chairs was a horse. Although I don't think I was making the Thanksgiving gathering bad. No one. The miracle, well, can kind of be thought in terms similar to how weather, changes and renews things. Likewise, the ferocity of how people express themselves to each other, or the potency in some other way. The rose is a good symbol for what opens and closes, and the temporariness of it can grant the brief comfort that one wants. Testament. The testament is touching on how people give up of things for each other. The crab tree reminds us of the bittersweetness and how that may be the best option. A reduced sentence reminds us that we can violate the spirit of the law when the letter of the law is kept. The gentleman reminds us that what people call a gentleman or a lady or whatever may be what interferes with life. Complaint and reply reminds us of the attitude towards others and how we don't always understand them as they would be expressing. Reconciliation reminds us that what we're not forgiving may have been forgotten. Now, I know this doesn't refer to some stuff. You don't just, if it's good to forgive, it's good to forgive, but if people are going to treat it as an excuse, it may not be. Because a person can say, ultimately, personal violations may not be, the main thing. Although you do have to try to get forgiveness from others and all that. Knobs and levers reminds us of our, how technology isn't always making things better. The virus, well, after the Spanish flu, people did, wonder when the next one's going to come. And what people thought the next one coming ended up just being the treatment of the next one coming. And we're not going to get into that on the channel, right? But you know what I mean. You can look up and see the evidence for yourself. Druid love. Well, people talk about druids like they're like some sort of magician and all sorts of stuff. And yeah, you can be, but you live amongst oak trees. Really, you just live in the part of the world where there's oak trees, America, Northern Europe. Do they have oak trees in Texas? Is it too hot? Parts of California, maybe not. Problems of gender. Well, it's about gendered language for the cosmos, right? Like, I have a book, and it talks about the sun goddess, and the moon goddess, and the earth goddess, and, other talk about, is it the sky, or is it the earth, or which one are you going to gender? It's like those things don't really gender themselves, and some people say, well, that's where homosexuality comes from. is that when you gender nature too much, you're going to see homosexual things going on out there. Um, some of it, maybe that's where some of it comes from. Confess, Marpessa. Well, if people are engaged in vice, it's not good necessarily to point out, oh, well, who's shared in that, if, that's what's being talked about. Some people just want to know the details of people's lives for really no good reason. Jus prima noctis reminds us that sometimes time doesn't heal. Work drafts. We remember that art, well, people do art for money, but things being worked on and refined for themselves, it's a bit different, right? Her beauty, well, some is expressed, some is not expressed. Like, some people really want graphic details of people and all that. Like, even if you say no, they want to find out some details. Always. Well, we can treat things like the Bible says, be like little children. And there is an approach that's almost innocent that comes off in such a way that it lasts. Desert fringe. Can make us think of the memories connected with certain days of the year and reinforcing them. The title of poet, well, some things go and come, and some ways of relating to people of certain types, again, goes and comes. Depth of love is, how sometimes things are like as if there's nothing else. And you're totally devoted. Breakfast table reminds of how sometimes the bonds are enforced about what is done after. The half-finished letter kind of comes off more about retirement. And when it comes to anything literary, we need to remember that it shouldn't just be about collection. Let it be learned from, let it be experienced. The Hazel Grove. Can connect us to ideas about a legacy, a shared legacy. Pity. Well, I don't know, does a person ever fall out of love? But certainly the warmness of the situation, that can, fade away. A silent visit. Well, when the work must be done, it doesn't have to be spoken about. Growing pains. Well, sometimes difficulty must be traversed, must be undergone. Friday night. Well, that's the biblical Sabbath. Not everything needs externalized. The pact. Well, covenants can change the identity that we're going under. Poor others. Well, sometimes there is no approach that is going to hold back the regard of others. A toast to death, and no, we're referring to a Robert Graves poem. We're not referring to a friend of mine who was not born yet. Well, the roles go and come, right? There's that chariot card idea, right? And sometimes the chariot card has a pair of people in it. The young Sibyl reminds that when people have a child together, well, sometimes the child is the one who's going to direct their fate. Records is how there's a memory to be established. And while the memory may not be perfect, you ask that it be accepted. The flowering aloe reminds of how people feel uninvited or as a stranger or something sometimes when there's mixed family gatherings. You know what I mean? Mixed as in different families. Circus ring reminds us of the divided attention, the divided loyalties, or at least the projection of that. Ageless reason reminds us to focus on what is rather than the endings. As when the mystic comes off as that Take Me to Church song does, without the blasphemy and the having to be about, well, that's them. But unposted letter. Well, we don't want to get rid of anybody's innocence or anything like that. But certainly this sense of I'm righteous and you're not, and that sort of stuff, that's what we want others to drop. Now, certainly they can be grateful for what they did or didn't do, and know that certain other people have made certain flaws, but, especially for living people, who's to say about the rest of it? Birth of a goddess. Well, it reminds us of marriage, how that doesn't have to end any innocence. That virginity, for example, has no value for someone who's a wife. And certainly the bringing about of what is produced in marriage, or what could be produced in marriage. We have these different stages. And this refers to Jesus, so it's no surprise that he did write a book on Jesus. Now, this day and age, he probably would have wrote a book forming opinions on Jesus. He would have had a book forming opinions on Muhammad. There's different things coming about. Beatrice and Dante reminds us that the reference isn't always pleasing to the referenced, and how the vision of the world, or formulation of opinion, more like it, may not be pleasing. The dilemma, I don't know. For a person with autism, it's probably not a dilemma because you think of things in different levels at the same time. So you think of the body and the mind and all that sort of stuff, and maybe different aspects of intellect, as people would call it. In Eckankar, there's that astral plane, causal plane, mental plane, etheric plane. So that's the broad mental plane. Of course, the etheric is thought of as a filter, and it's like, yeah, that is the broad mental, it continues to be that. The wall, and, well, I knew a woman, and she spoke of, like, this wall and stuff, and, like, I totally understood because we weren't married, so therefore she felt like she had to keep a wall, and anything contrary to that just would have brought her misery, and apparently did later in life. But then again, there's this authenticness of communication and stuff in between. Women and masks, well, I think of those masquerade parties and stuff, right? And, well, people are seen differently by different people. Some of that's because of their intentional choices of how to act. Some people have a shyness, and it's not necessarily a dishonesty or something like that. And some people in the West have taken to even covering their face, even though I don't think any religion really requires it, because they want to be seen for themselves, not just for some appearance. But this poem's of personalities, not. Tilth is prefaced by something that a New York critic states, and I agree, maybe the 70s wasn't his best work, although he did do some other stuff, and maybe that's when he wrote more of the novels and concept books and stuff like this, was the 70s and the 80s. Tilth, well, stands against modernity in a way, and not the technology, but simply the attitude that has been put to it. The Last Fistful reminds of how some people woo people, and then the person they woo works their manipulation, or a different sort. The Traditionalist reminds that what we do learn of, what we do acquire, that needs to be manifested in some way. And if they're just treated as collections and stuff, then, they seem relatively worthless in terms of life. The prepared statement is like the difference between truth and fact, in that sideways sort of way of speaking. And that bit in the Bible is like, what is truth? It's like, well, truth in a lot of languages and cultures is more than the truth. It's more than the fact, as we may use those words. It's more about a practicing the theory. Saint Anthony of Padua relates to finding what was lost. Broken Compact reminds us that sometimes we do need to speak up with the word of warning. A Dream of Francis Speedwell reminds us that we can see in others references to others still. The Encounter reminds us that love, or whatever you want to call it, still may last through abuse. Of course, you shouldn't put up with abuse. Age gap, relates to the obvious age gaps, and things are different between male and female, obviously for reasons of nature and stuff like this. If men reproduce their whole lives, that's one of the factors. And people don't always choose things. Nightmare of salinity. Well, it's fine to admit when it happens. And sometimes these nightmares are such that it relates that, we owe people and all that other stuff. And it's like, which in a way can be a better state to be in. This state of, we have to do things for other than the world owes me. There's a Green Day song. Absent Crusader reminds us of accountability. And we may not be around to witness the results, but we still have accountability. Dream recalled on waking. I must admit, for the most part, I don't. I'm sure I could probably work on that. Being sleep deprived most of the time for the past 7.5 years is not helping with that. Colophon, well, we need to put finishing touches on things and need to sort of figure out the end of things. The Promise Ballad reminds of a longing to be on the same page and to free themselves of temptation and influences upon them. The Impossible Day. People can go through a lot together. And of course, you need to remember when it's not done by the other, to not hold it against the other. And they're still alive. And there's that light that they can bring out in each other. The Poet's Curse. Well, sometimes by doing the work of figuring things out and expressing things and such, well, it limits things in some way, right? You can keep things from getting worse, but then you keep them on the bad side, or you keep them on the good side, and the good side, you don't let it fully reach its thing. So you got to be careful with that as an artist. 7 years. Well, what is real may last. It may not be as built up, but what is real will last. Love as lovelessness, and, well, things are different for different people, and so it may last differently for the different people. The Scared Child reminds us that people may feel like they're being held back, and that can lead to infidelity. I'm not sure if that's what's being stated here, but it's important that people do be true to their word, and nothing one can do is going to mean that the other is not free to make their own choices, as all must end kind of comes off like wandering out in the woods and finding a bush. But there's food, but there's thorns, you know? I mean, I think of blackberries because I have to cut down blackberries every year. Touch my shut lips reminds of ellipses that develop. The moon's last quarter is to show appreciation for the details. True evil. I don't know if it's quite the body. I think if the body sticks to its true nature, then the body's not going to lead you to evil. Although it can be the vehicle for directing feelings and emotions. When and why reminds us that sometimes things aren't too wild, and people can work together through what seems, well, people aren't the same, so things seem contradictory. The window pane? Well, now that we can be separate from some of the forces of nature, we're reminded of, just what can happen to us. I barely missed being in here, probably sleeping right here when the cement and everything else went through the room. And I've looked outside with lightning. It's like, and it can be wet. It can be rather wet outside when there's lightning. So if the lightning strikes the ground, I don't know if the one time I got was right, the lightning happened right in front of me, that if things were different clothing wise, like if I hadn't been wearing boots or something like that, things could have been a lot different. Pride or progeny can refer to having children, and it can refer to one's legacy, you can call it, and not overestimating your legacy. That was the night. Are we referring to real gargoyles, or just the concept because people had statues that they treated like protected them or something like that? Or maybe it was some sort of scapegoat thing. It's like, if we give the devil this, then, it's not going to take the rest. The Queen of Time. Now, I don't believe that is the approach to take. You take a side, you don't, I'm going to do a little something to this side, and, The Queen of Time reminds us to be honest, and there's prices to pay for one's dares. But if you're firm in them, they're kind of, it doesn't have the impact that when you're not firm in them. Should I care? Reminds that love isn't necessarily about being together. Timeless meaning reminds us that things seem, beyond what the individuals involved, at least the humans, could have planned. Envoy reminds us of the context that conveys our message. Ours is no wedlock conveys of that sentiment found earlier of the idea of marriage for children. And I understand the idea of people not wanting to label things. The discarded love poem. Well, flies in the Vaseline, right? that's not the best analogy. You know what I mean? There's could be the problems of it all. And of course, if the devils are involved, oh, you think all things are, and then you realize the devil was involved. Walks like an angel, talks like an angel, then I got wise. You know, earlier lovers didn't do that one very well, but you know what I mean. Well, some things are beyond honor. Fast bound together reminds of being past the ill and just being together in it. LSD is half disappointing coming across it. It turns out to just be about money. And one of the things that has happened is that even when there's bad rulers, they make it about, oh, they're going to the gold standard, have to go to war to stop them. Well, they don't make that argument, but that's really what's going on. They don't care about injustices done in Libya or World War II Germany or whatever. It's about the banking system. I mean, it shouldn't be about the banking system, but it ends up being about the banking system. 3 words only reminds us of why the third sphere is considered as liberation, right? Because not only is this something you claim, but you mean it. You prove it true in the world's eye. Of course, you don't be hypocritical about it and make it about show, but it's true from every angle. True magic? Well, when I say magic on my channel, I almost never mean evil magic. When I just say magic, don't presume that's not what I mean. I don't mean seher or saher to give it an extra ancient Egyptian form. It's that there's the feelings, the emotions, they're changed through something. And again, here's another 7 Years poem. Tower of Love. Well, things are built up, right? The love letter. Well, not everything is asked for, but sometimes it's needed. 7 Fresh Years. Makes us think how things can be unusual in the differences. But there's nothing to blame as far as the differences. As a less than robber, well, when relationships are over, people are like, oh, you stole those years of my life. And it's like, no. You weren't like this before a certain point. So don't go back and, singleness and love. Well, isn't that one of those things that you got, well, I'm thinking about the fifth dimension thing. Because, yeah, we think of ourselves in terms that isn't what we really are. Although we have to live in those terms, right? The ultimate self isn't, this material incarnation with its dimensions of space and time. There's a further side to it. Love charms and, well, there are such things as love charms, as things that people make and whatnot. But here's more of the actions and the ideas that form. And at the gate, you think of, about there's going to be something. And in this case, the idea is there's going to be some artistic expression. It's like, it's going to be when it's going to be. The moon's tear. reminds us not to be demanding, and that some powers of influence, well, they're definitely limited. From otherwhere or nowhere, well, you're not always understood, that's perfectly fine. And some things are sort of between all and none. Name? Well, I don't believe in changing names when it comes to marriage. Change names because there's some bad character or something associated with your name. It's associated with some sort of problematic belief or something like that. So you let go of that. You can just change your name to affirm something, but I don't believe in. But people make their case, whether it's all one-sided, or not. People make their case. 2 disciplines. Well, Christian marriage and permissivity, you could say. Well, I don't think that people should get married just for the public opinion of them. The ugly secret. Okay. This definitely sounds like it's about infidelity. And the point isn't who, it's just dealing with what was and seeing if you could move on. We shouldn't create a society where this is just the common or usual thing at some point in life. But, multiple people have to come to terms with such things, even if it's not in a marriage. 3 years waiting reminds us that, well, there is such a thing as trying to figure out people's secrets. We got to be careful what we mean by divination. But art's got to be there as what it is instead of just something forced to whatever. The crystal. And so we appreciate those things which aren't really by effort, right? And of course, people shape crystals and stuff like this, but you can appreciate stones for what they are. And of course, there's the cutting of the stones, and even then, it's like this is an artificial stones. You can tell the difference, as far as I can tell. A charm for sound sleeping. Well, we all want something unadulterated. And it doesn't have to be artificially flowery.